It was an ordinary evening, the kind that usually passes quietly in our household. I had just returned from work, carrying the usual blend of fatigue and anticipation to catch up with my family. My daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, and I assumed our interaction would be routine. Some casual questions about her day, maybe a bit of laughter over something trivial. But what came next was so unexpected that it still reverberates in my mind months later. In the middle of a seemingly ordinary conversation, she looked up at me with a calm but piercing intensity and said, "The best gift would be if you just died." The words hit me like a physical blow. At first, I couldn't comprehend them. My brain seemed to freeze for a moment, as if trying to reject the reality of what I had just heard. I felt a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. How could someone I loved unconditionally, someone whose life I had nurtured from the very beginning, say something so cruel and final? It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the certainty behind them, the way they were delivered without hesitation or apology. They carried a weight that suggested not just anger or frustration, but a profound desire for my absence. That realization cut deeper than anything I could have anticipated. I had always thought of our home as a place of mutual care and support, yet in that moment, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. I also remember the way my heart raced and my chest tightened. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was physical. The betrayal, the incomprehensible nature of the statement made it difficult to respond immediately. My instincts were to react, to yell, to cry, to demand an explanation, but I realized that any immediate reaction might escalate the situation rather than clarify it. Instead, I took a step back, trying to understand what could drive someone I loved so deeply to articulate such a statement. What struck me most was not just the shock, but the confrontation with a painful truth that words, even from those closest to us, can wound more sharply than we often expect. That night, I realized that parenting does not come with guarantees of gratitude or unconditional kindness. It comes with vulnerability and the need to protect oneself emotionally, even when the source of pain is your own child. This moment would mark the beginning of a long journey towards establishing boundaries, understanding, and ultimately self-preservation. To fully understand the impact of her words, it's important to consider the broader context of our relationship. Every family has its complexities, different personalities, expectations, and patterns of interaction, and ours was no exception. My daughter and I shared many loving moments, but like any parent and child, we also experienced tension and conflict over the years. These patterns, often small and seemingly insignificant at the time, accumulated and shaped the way we related to each other. From an early age, my daughter was outspoken, strong-willed, and determined to assert her independence. These are qualities I deeply admired, but they also meant that disagreements could quickly escalate. I often found myself in the role of mediator, trying to balance guidance with granting her autonomy. Sometimes my attempts to correct or advise were met with frustration or resistance, which created subtle rifts over time. The love and pride I felt were always present, but so was the challenge of navigating boundaries in a way that respected both of us. Additionally, life circumstances added pressure. Like many families, we faced moments of stress, school challenges, financial concerns, or personal struggles that increased emotional intensity. During these times, conversations could easily become charged, patience would wear thin, and misunderstandings would fester. Without addressing these underlying tensions, minor frustrations sometimes escalated into moments of disproportionate anger or hurtful expressions. There were also patterns of unspoken expectations. As a parent, I may have assumed certain behaviors or respect would be automatic, while my daughter may have perceived these expectations as restrictive or controlling.
This mismatch created invisible friction that neither of us fully articulated. Over time, these unspoken resentments simmered beneath the surface, making it easier for a single, intense statement to emerge, one that expressed years of compounded frustration in an extreme way. It's crucial to recognize that this context does not excuse the words she used, nor does it diminish the pain they caused. However, understanding the history and existing tensions helps explain why such an extreme statement could arise. It highlights that family conflicts are rarely spontaneous. They are often the culmination of patterns, miscommunications, and emotional buildup. Recognizing this context allowed me to approach the situation not only with hurt, but with perspective, understanding that the words were a symptom of deeper relational dynamics that needed attention, reflection, and ultimately the establishment of boundaries to protect both of us.
The moment her words sank in, I felt an emotional shockwave that I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just sadness or disappointment. It was a profound sense of hurt that seemed to ripple through every part of me. When someone you love with all your heart expresses a wish for your absence, it forces you to confront emotions that are difficult to even name. A mix of grief, disbelief, and an almost physical ache of rejection. I felt as though a part of me had been shattered, as if the trust and connection I had nurtured for years were suddenly fragile, maybe even broken. It's one thing to hear criticism or disappointment from your child. That is part of growth and relationship. But these words carried a finality that was shocking. They weren't a fleeting anger or a reaction to a specific event. They were absolute, leaving me questioning how someone who depended on me, who had grown under my care, could speak so cruelly. The emotional impact wasn't contained in the moment. It lingered. Every smile or casual conversation afterward felt tinged with unease, and I found myself constantly replaying the sentence in my head, wondering where things had gone wrong. Beyond the initial shock, there was fear. Fear that our relationship could be fundamentally altered, that love could be conditional or fragile. I realized that words, especially from those we hold closest, have the power to wound far more deeply than we often acknowledge. This moment forced me to confront the vulnerability inherent in parenting, the reality that no amount of care, attention, or support guarantees gratitude, kindness, or even respect. I also felt anger, but it was complicated. It wasn't just anger at her words, it was anger at the situation, at the breakdown of trust, and at the idea that nurturing and providing could be met with such cruelty. I had to recognize these emotions as valid, without letting them completely control my response. Accepting the depth of this emotional impact was the first step toward understanding the need for boundaries. Because if love is unconditional, it should not come at the cost of personal dignity or emotional safety. In the end, this emotional upheaval became a catalyst for reflection and change. It forced me to question the dynamics of our relationship, my own responses, and the ways I had perhaps enabled patterns that were unhealthy. The shock and pain were intense, but they became the foundation for a crucial realization. Protecting oneself emotionally is not selfish. It is necessary for maintaining the capacity to love and guide others effectively.
After the shock and emotional upheaval, I knew I had to do something, not out of anger or vengeance, but out of necessity, to protect myself and to make clear that words, even from a child, carry consequences. Setting boundaries in a parent-child relationship is never easy. Society often tells us that love means unconditional giving, but I learned that love without limits can become self-destructive. I had to confront the reality that continuing to provide support without addressing the underlying disrespect would only enable harmful patterns to persist. The decision to cancel the funding was not made lightly. It wasn't a punishment designed to hurt my daughter. Rather, it was a deliberate act to establish a line she could not cross without consequences. Boundaries are not about severing ties, they are about defining respect. By withdrawing financial support, I was sending a clear message. Our relationship cannot thrive if it is rooted in cruelty or disregard. Support, emotional, financial, or otherwise, must be reciprocal, founded on respect and mutual responsibility. Setting this boundary was as much about protecting myself as it was about teaching an important life lesson. Life is full of expectations, obligations, and interactions where respect is required. No parent should be subjected to verbal abuse, nor should anyone in a position of care feel obligated to continue enabling harmful behavior. I realize that allowing disrespect to go unchecked not only diminishes one's own well-being, but also prevents growth in the other person. Boundaries create a framework where accountability exists, and accountability is essential for healthy relationships. This step also helped me clarify my own values. I needed to define what I could and could not tolerate, to communicate clearly without ambiguity, and to stand firm even in the face of guilt or societal pressure. It was a test of courage, but also of self-respect. I had to accept that love and support cannot and should not come at the cost of personal dignity or emotional health. In the weeks that followed, I found a new sense of clarity. The act of setting boundaries was painful, yes, but also empowering. It allowed me to reclaim agency over my own life while creating a framework for future interactions. It reinforced the understanding that boundaries are not walls to push others away. They are guidelines that foster respect, trust, and ultimately the possibility of genuine reconciliation. The decision to cancel the funding was not impulsive. It was grounded in a clear understanding of responsibility, both mine and my daughter's. Financial support in a parent-child relationship is often framed as unconditional, but I came to realize that providing money without regard to behavior or mutual respect can inadvertently reinforce negative patterns. Support should not be a substitute for accountability, nor should it reward hurtful behavior. In this case, continuing to fund her activities, lifestyle, or education while enduring such a profound verbal attack would have undermined the very principles I wanted to uphold: respect, responsibility, and integrity. Providing financial support is a form of trust. When we give resources, we are expressing confidence that they will be used responsibly and that the recipient values and respects the giver. By canceling the funding, I was asserting that trust must be earned, not taken for granted. It was a way of teaching that every action has consequences, and that disrespect, no matter the relationship, cannot be ignored or excused. This approach does not diminish love. In fact, it reinforces it by modeling the importance of self-respect and ethical responsibility. It also became a matter of personal well-being. Continuing to fund her without addressing the emotional harm she caused would have sent the message that my resources, time, and energy are unlimited and can be exploited. Setting clear limits is essential not only for emotional health, but also for teaching real-world principles, that support is meaningful when it comes with accountability, and that relationships require mutual respect to be sustainable. I also recognize the broader lesson embedded in this decision. Life does not always provide support unconditionally. Employers, partners, and institutions all operate within systems of mutual responsibility. By taking this action, I was preparing my daughter, albeit in a difficult way, for the realities of life, where entitlement, without effort or consideration for others, can lead to consequences. It was a way to reinforce personal responsibility without relying on fear or anger. Ultimately, the cancellation of funding was a deliberate, thoughtful decision to align actions with values. It was a tangible expression of a principle that had become central to our family dynamic: that love and care do not equate to enabling harmful behavior, and that every individual must take responsibility for how their words and actions affect others. It was not an easy choice, but it was necessary, and it was made with the hope that it would encourage reflection, growth, and eventually a path toward mutual respect.
It was important for me to distinguish between consequences and punishment. So often, in moments of emotional pain, people conflate the two, believing that a strict or disciplinary action is the same as teaching a lesson or creating space for accountability. But there is a crucial difference. Punishment is reactive, often fueled by anger or a desire to make someone suffer. Consequences, on the other hand, are deliberate, structured, and designed to help someone understand the impact of their actions while maintaining the possibility of growth and repair. Withdrawing financial support fell firmly into the category of a consequence. It was not about revenge or trying to get back at my daughter for her words. Instead, it was a measured response to behavior that violated the trust, respect, and emotional safety that are essential in any relationship. By framing it as a consequence, I was emphasizing that actions have outcomes, and that disrespectful or harmful behavior cannot simply be ignored, even within the context of family. This distinction also matters for emotional clarity. Punishment can create resentment and escalate conflicts, especially between a parent and child. Consequences, by contrast, foster understanding. They communicate, I hear you, I care about you, but I also have limits, and these limits matter. In this way, consequences protect the caregiver while simultaneously encouraging reflection in the other person. They are not punitive for the sake of inflicting pain. They are instructive, meant to illuminate the connection between actions and outcomes. I also recognize that consequences are more effective when they are consistent and predictable. In this case, the funding had always been contingent, implicitly or explicitly, on responsible behavior and respect. By formally withdrawing it after such a severe verbal attack, I reinforced a clear pattern. Crossing boundaries has consequences, and trust and support are not unlimited. This was not about holding a grudge. It was about reinforcing a principle that would be meaningful and understandable, even if it was difficult to accept initially. Finally, framing the decision as a consequence allowed me to remain grounded in love and care. My goal was not to alienate or punish my daughter, but to protect both of us, to safeguard my own well-being, and to create a framework in which she could reflect on her words and behavior. Consequences are about clarity, accountability, and the possibility of growth. Punishment is about retribution. Understanding this distinction was essential in making a decision that was thoughtful, principled, and ultimately in the best interest of our relationship in the long term.
Looking back, it became clear that this hurtful statement didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a gradual breakdown in communication. Over time, small misunderstandings, unspoken frustrations, and unmet expectations had accumulated, creating an undercurrent of tension that neither of us addressed effectively. Words left unsaid and feelings unacknowledged can build like pressure in a sealed container, and eventually the lid bursts. Unfortunately, in our case, it bursts in a way that was profoundly painful. Communication is the lifeblood of any relationship, but it requires both honesty and safety. In our household, there were moments where honest expression became fraught with conflict or judgment, causing emotions to be suppressed rather than shared constructively. My daughter, like many children, was learning to navigate her emotions and articulate her needs, and I, like many parents, was trying to guide, support, and correct without realizing how my own actions or words might contribute to her frustration. Over time, this created a chasm where true understanding became difficult. The statement she made was a symptom of this breakdown. It wasn't merely a moment of anger, it was an extreme expression of feelings that hadn't been acknowledged or processed in a healthy way. It highlighted the distance that had grown between us, a distance fueled by miscommunication, assumptions, and unspoken grievances. In that moment, it became painfully clear that our interactions had lost some of their mutual respect and trust. This experience taught me a vital lesson about the importance of proactive communication. Waiting until conflict reaches a peak is rarely effective. Instead, cultivating regular, honest, and compassionate dialogue is crucial, even when it's uncomfortable. Expressing boundaries, expectations, and emotions early can prevent resentment from festering and help both parties feel heard and valued. It also reinforced the need for listening, not just hearing words, but understanding the underlying emotions and concerns. Sometimes hurtful statements are cries for attention, recognition, or help. Recognizing this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it provides a framework for addressing the underlying issues rather than focusing solely on the surface level conflict. Ultimately, the communication breakdown was a wake-up call. It revealed that respect, honesty, and emotional safety must be nurtured continually, not taken for granted. Without these elements, even the strongest bonds can be strained, and words that wound deeply can emerge unexpectedly. Addressing this breakdown became a necessary step toward rebuilding trust, restoring clarity, and creating a healthier dynamic where both my daughter and I could engage openly, respectfully, and with mutual understanding.
After the shock of that hurtful statement and the subsequent emotional turmoil, I knew that simply reacting with withdrawal or boundaries, while necessary, was not enough. Repairing the relationship, or at least opening the door to understanding, required intentional effort. I realized that rebuilding trust after such a rupture would not happen overnight. It demanded patience, reflection, and consistent actions that demonstrated care without compromising my own well-being. The first step was creating space for dialogue. I reached out calmly, not to argue or defend myself, but to express that her words had caused deep pain and that I wanted to understand what led her to say them. This was not easy. Emotions were raw and the potential for defensiveness was high. But approaching the situation with curiosity and empathy, rather than anger, allowed for the possibility of a constructive conversation. I made it clear that listening didn't mean tolerating abuse, and speaking didn't mean blaming. It was about mutual understanding. I also encouraged written communication, giving her the opportunity to express herself without the immediate heat of a face-to-face confrontation. Sometimes putting thoughts and emotions into writing allows clarity and honesty to emerge in ways spoken words cannot. At the same time, I use this as an opportunity to reflect on my own responses, my own possible shortcomings in communication, and how I could model emotional responsibility. Counseling and professional guidance became part of the repair process as well. Seeking the help of a neutral third party provided a safe environment for both of us to explore underlying feelings, learn healthier communication techniques, and rebuild trust. Therapy offered tools for conflict resolution that were difficult to achieve on our own, especially when emotions were still raw and patterns of miscommunication had become entrenched. Small, consistent gestures also played a role in repair. Demonstrating care, expressing love in appropriate ways, and acknowledging positive interactions helped to slowly rebuild the emotional connection. Repair is rarely a single dramatic act. It is a series of deliberate choices to show respect, understanding, and commitment to the relationship. Ultimately, these repair attempts were not about erasing the hurt or pretending it didn't happen. They were about acknowledging reality, taking responsibility for what I could control, and creating a pathway for healthier, more respectful interaction in the future. By combining boundaries with open dialogue and professional support, I was able to transform a moment of profound pain into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and the possibility of reconnection.
Experiencing such a painful moment in my relationship with my daughter forced me to confront not only her behavior, but also my own responses, assumptions, and boundaries. The journey was not easy, but it became a profound period of personal growth. I realized that parenting is not simply about giving, whether it's time, attention, or financial support, but about guiding, modeling, and protecting both our children and ourselves. This experience reminded me that self-respect and emotional health are not negotiable, even in the closest relationships.
One of the first lessons I learned was the importance of boundaries. Prior to this, I had always believed that love meant endless patience, tolerance, and sacrifice. While love does involve sacrifice, I discovered that it does not require tolerating verbal abuse or harmful behavior. Setting boundaries is not a sign of weakness or a lack of love. It is a crucial act of self-care and a necessary component of any healthy relationship. By defining what was acceptable and what was not, I reclaimed a sense of agency over my own life and emotions. I also learned the power of reflection. Moments of conflict can be overwhelming, and our initial reactions are often driven by emotion rather than clarity. By taking time to process my feelings, I was able to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This reflection helped me differentiate between actions that were harmful and actions that were teachable, allowing me to act with both firmness and compassion. Another aspect of growth involved understanding accountability. I recognized that love and care must be paired with responsibility, both my own and hers. Supporting someone financially, emotionally, or in other ways should come with the expectation of respect, communication, and mutual responsibility. This experience reinforced that enforcing consequences, maintaining integrity, and upholding personal standards are not only compatible with love, they are expressions of it. Finally, I gained resilience and clarity about my values. I learned that difficult moments, even those filled with pain, can serve as catalysts for strengthening relationships, improving communication, and cultivating self-awareness. I emerged from this experience with a deeper understanding of what it means to love responsibly, to guide with intention, and to protect oneself while still fostering connection. This personal growth transformed my perspective on parenting and relationships in general. It taught me that love is most meaningful when it is balanced with respect, accountability, and emotional honesty. Painful as the experience was, it became a powerful teacher, showing me that even in moments of conflict, there is the potential for reflection, growth, and the development of stronger, healthier bonds.
As I reflect on this experience, the message I want to leave with you is clear. Healthy relationships, especially within families, require boundaries, accountability, and mutual respect. Love alone, while powerful, is not always enough to sustain a relationship when harmful words or behaviors are present. We often assume that those closest to us will automatically act with care and consideration, but reality shows us that respect must be nurtured and, at times, reinforced through consequences. One of the most important lessons from this journey is that setting boundaries is not selfish, it is essential. Whether with children, friends, or partners, establishing limits protects emotional well-being and models the kind of behavior we hope to cultivate in others. When boundaries are communicated clearly and consistently, they provide structure, clarity, and a framework for healthier interactions. They help us teach responsibility while maintaining our own dignity and self-respect. Another key takeaway is the distinction between consequences and punishment. Consequences are not about revenge. They are about accountability, clarity, and the potential for growth. By framing actions in this way, we allow space for learning and reflection rather than resentment. This principle applies not just in family dynamics, but in life in general. Every action has repercussions, and understanding this is critical for fostering integrity and trust. Communication, too, cannot be overlooked. Many conflicts escalate because emotions go unexpressed or words are misinterpreted. Open, honest, and compassionate dialogue is vital to maintaining connection, resolving misunderstandings, and rebuilding trust after a rupture. Equally important is listening, not just hearing words, but understanding the emotions and needs behind them. Effective communication creates a foundation where respect and empathy can flourish. Finally, personal growth often comes from discomfort. Painful moments, like the one I experienced, challenge us to examine our values, responses, and relationships. They push us to act with courage, self-awareness, and intentionality. While it can be difficult to face such situations, doing so provides opportunities to strengthen bonds, reinforce principles, and cultivate resilience. In conclusion, the most important gift we can give ourselves and others is the gift of respect, clarity, and accountability. Love is not diminished by boundaries or consequences. It is reinforced by them. By prioritizing emotional health, communication, and responsible action, we create relationships that are not only sustainable, but meaningful. And, perhaps most importantly, we show that even in the most difficult moments, there is an opportunity for understanding, growth, and the possibility of reconciliation.
Thank you for listening to this personal story. It reminds us that even in the closest relationships, words matter, and setting boundaries is a sign of love, not weakness. If this resonated with you, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want to join a community where we explore stories, growth, and meaningful connections, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Remember, respect, accountability, and clear communication make love stronger. See you in the next video.